Where did Sauron's character come from? Which is his background? In which of Tolkien's stories did he appear for the first time? That's what I'm going to talk about in this video, and we will see that this character has a very long history, a history that goes back to the beginning of the first stories of Tolkien's. We are going to talk especially about the Beren and Lúthien stories that were explained, that were detailed by Christopher Tolkien in this book. To see the details, we will have to go deeper into Beren and Lúthien's story and see how the different versions of this story contain forerunners of the character of Sauron. This story plays a central part in Tolkien's universe, in Tolkien's Silmarillion. It is one of the three most important stories. It is central to the plot of the Silmarillion. It is related, very tightly related to the other two most important stories, the story of the children of Húrin and the fall of Gondolin. Also, this was very relevant for Tolkien for biographical reasons. He identified himself and his wife as Beren and Lúthien in some way. Some events of Beren and Lúthien's story are based on real-life events of Tolkien's biography. This is also very interesting. He made his wife's and later his own tomb be engraved with the names of Beren and Lúthien, as we can see. And another reason why this story was very important for Tolkien is, or at least for Tolkien's later work, is the relationship that exists between this story and the later Aragorn and Arwen love story. In some ways, Beren and Lúthien's story is a prefiguration of Arwen and Aragorn's love story. So this very important story is the context in which we can look for the first appearance of Sauron. The first recognizable appearance of Sauron's character happens in the Lay of Lúthien. This is the most complete version that we have of Beren and Lúthien's story. It is unfinished anyway, but and it was written 20 or 30 years before the Lord of the Rings. There is a part of this story where Beren and his companions are wandering by enemy territory and are caught by a band of orcs and taken to a fortress in the river Sirion, a fortress called the Wizard's Isle, and they are interrogated by a character that is the forerunner of Sauron. He is called Thu. And well, it is afterwards. It is clear, as Tolkien rewrote some small parts of the story afterward, that this character is Sauron. He rewrote some short versions of this story after the Lord of the Rings, and this character Thu is called Sauron in those later versions of the story. He didn't get very far rewriting this story, but this is enough to see that this character Thu and Sauron are one and the same. By reading Thu's description in this poem, we can see that some of Sauron's traits are already there. I am going to read some part of the poem. Now in that hill was the abode of one most evil, and the road that from Beleriand thither came, he watched with sleepless eyes aflame. Men called him Thu, and as a god, in after days beneath his rod, bewildered bowed to him and made his ghastly temples in the shade. Not yet by men enthralled adored, now was he Morgoth's mightiest lord, master of wolves, whose shivering howl forever echoed in the hills, and foul enchantments and dark sicildry did weave and wield in glamoury. That necromancer held his hosts of phantoms and of wandering ghosts, of misbegotten or spell-wronged monsters that about him thronged, working his bidding dark and vile, the werewolves of the Wizard's Isle. So this reference to sleepless eyes of flame and the fact that this character is Morgoth's most important lieutenant. This is very clearly a forerunner of Sauron. Well, even the name of Thu may be related to the first syllable in Sauron's name. The Thu and Sau may be different forms of the same syllable, because in the th sound in other Elvish languages corresponds to the s sound in Quenya, as we can see in other words like Isil and Ithil. So this is maybe some early form of the name of Sauron. Not just it is not just that the characters has some of the traits of later Sauron, but even the name and other things lead us to think that Sauron and Thu are one and the same. This part of Beren and Lúthien story is also interesting because we can look for it in a previous version of the story called the Tale of Tinuviel. That is one of the first stories that Tolkien wrote. In fact, it is probably the second one after the Fall of Gondolin. It is collected by Christopher Tolkien in one of the first volume of the history of Middle-earth, the Book of Lost Tales. And as I say, this is probably one of the first stories that Tolkien wrote, and as I have also said, this has a very important biographical relevance for himself. So this Tale of Tinuviel is the very first version of the story. It has a children's tale style about it, as most of the tales in the Book of Lost Tales. It contains important difference related to the later versions of the story. For example, Beren is an elf in this early version, so it doesn't have the connotations of the impossible love between a man and an elf. This Romeo and Juliet theme. So as we had this part in the later version of the story where Beren was taken captive by Thu, by Sauron's forerunner, we can look for a parallel part here, and we can find it. And the curious thing is that the parallel version of the later character of Thu is a cat. It's Tevildo, Prince of Cats. So we can see that actually this has a children's story ring to it. This Tevildo is a servant of Morgoth or of Melko, as he's called in this very first version of the story, where the names were still fluctuating a bit in Tolkien's mind. And but anyway, he's captured by Melko, by this forerunner of Morgoth, of the first Dark Lord, and he's given Beren is given as a helper in the kitchens of this character, of this cat, Tevildo. I'm going to read also a part of the story, of the Tale of Tinuviel, where Tevildo is described. It says that Beren was to be made a thrall of Tevildo, Prince of Cats. Now Tevildo was a mighty cat, the mightiest of all, and possessed of an evil sprite, as some say, and he was in Melkor's constant following. And that cat had all cats subject to him, and his subjects were the chasers and getters of meat for Melkor's table and for his frequent feasts. Later it says that Tevildo's sons sat waving and lashing their beautiful tails, but Tevildo himself sat at their head, and he was a mighty cat, and coal-black and evil to look upon. His eyes were long and very narrow and slanted, and gleamed both red and green, but his great whiskers were as stout and as sharp as needles. His purr was like the roll of drums, and his growl like thunder, but when he yelled in wrath, it turned the blood cold, and indeed the small beasts and birds were frozen as to stone, or dropped lifeless often at the very sound. So I think it's not far-fetched to say that Tolkien could have had consciously or subconsciously in his thoughts these Tevildo's gleaming eyes when he wrote about Thu's sleepless eyes of flame years later. It seems to me that this is not a character that was wholly replaced by another different one, but that Tolkien had in his mind this Tevildo character when he later introduced the character of Thu, the later Sauron. So this may be a reason to think that the background of Sauron's character was originally taken from this Tevildo character, this cat, and so in a way, in the internal Tolkien history of his legendarium, we can think of this Tevildo as the source for the later Sauron character. Thank you. See you later.